Hello and welcome to all of you joining us on Lincolnshire Reporter now. My name's Stefan Pidluzhny, and with me for the second in our series of live Facebook chats with the candidates standing in the Sleaford and North Hykeham by-election is Victoria Ayling from UKIP. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
I hear the traffic was a bit bad getting into Lincoln today.
Interesting, it was the Christmas market, but there we go, I'm here.
Well, it's certainly been a busy year for you. You stood in the Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner elections. You were very vocal in the European Union referendum as well. Why are you standing in this election, and why do you think you're the best person to become the next MP for Sleaford and North Hykeham?
Well, I'm a Lincolnshire County Councillor, so I'm local. I understand the local issues, but also I'm a passionate, proven Brexiteer, having taken part in many Brexit debates and campaigned for it, and as a Police and Crime Commissioner candidate, realised the concerns people had about crime. So I believe I'm very well qualified, not only to represent the people of Sleaford and North Hykeham, but also to represent them in Parliament. And because I'm not interested in a greasy poll, because I would do the job 100% of the time, believe I would make the best MP for the residents.
You've obviously previous experience of standing in parliamentary elections up in Great Grimsby twice.
Yes.
Obviously first as a Conservative and then as UKIP. Do you think this will be third time lucky for you, and why is this election different to those two?
There's a different feel. People are fed up with the government. Just look at the immigration figures that have just been released. Despite promises of reducing the numbers and controlling our borders, which Theresa May's Home Secretary kept going on about, and now as Prime Minister, 650,000 up until July, that's ridiculous. We can't sustain that. And people have had enough. That's just one example. But also the backsliding on Brexit. All this delaying and faffing about with a Remain Prime Minister, a predominantly Remain cabinet, and a Tory candidate who has had no history of campaigning for Brexit other than telling us that she will support the single market in her brochure. Now that to me is not a genuine Brexiteer. People want to give the government a kick now, and the vibe out there in Sleaford and North Hykeham is they are ready for a change. What's happened in America proves to people that you don't just have to go along with the same old. People are ripe for a change, and they want to show the government they will not be taken for granted.
You've mentioned Brexit quite a few times already, yes, which I thought you might do. Many people voted leave, including in Sleaford and North Hykeham, yes, over concerns about immigration, which again you've mentioned. You've mentioned that you want to see immigration come down. That's obviously no secret. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on what are the benefits of immigration and what's immigration brought to Lincolnshire.
Well, I live quite close to Boston, and I also know it's an issue in Sleaford and North Hykeham. It's not just what's happening locally. We know that locally, a lot of locals feel displaced from work. The infrastructure is not able to cope with the sheer numbers. It's irrelevant where they come from.
So
it's just the sheer volume.
So that's the downside.
That's the downside.
Are there any positives?
There have been some positives, and we know the Poles generally are very hard-working. But let me emphasise one thing, that the Poles themselves that have been here for some years and established themselves here are very keen on supporting UKIP, because they're very concerned about the influx of Bulgarian and Romanian workers that are undercutting their work and undermining what they're doing.
So it's a lot to do with undercutting of wages?
That is a big part of it, but it's the sheer numbers. 650,000 up until July. It's not sustainable. And people have had enough of that, but also they've had enough of the backsliding on Brexit, because it's not just the immigration. We are paying £1 billion a month into the European Union. Since we voted to get out, 5 months, £5 billion have gone to the European Union. Enough is enough. People want change, and they will vote for change in Sleaford and North Hykeham.
Your former leader, Nigel Farage, I was going to say current, but obviously that's not the case anymore.
Only by a couple of days.
Yeah, he's spoken quite a lot about an Australian-style point system, so that's to control the quality and quantity of those coming into the UK. That I imagine would mean that the more high-skilled workers would actually be allowed to come in, and those with low skills or no skills would not be allowed to come in. If that's the case, then who will work in the fields right across Lincolnshire?
I think you'll find that we don't advocate throwing out people that have established here legally.
Of course, but what happens
Yeah.
if they want to return to their country and we need...
The Australian point system works, and it is fair. It means people cannot come here unless they can support themselves, that they have health insurance, that they have a job to go to. And in the unskilled field of work, we know that if there is a need for it, it will be covered. The Australian point system will work, it is proven to work, and I think it should be implemented here to stop what's happening now, where our infrastructure is being swamped, that local people are actually priced out of jobs, which traditionally they've done for many generations. Let me point out what used to happen in Boston. You used to get people coming over from Sheffield and Nottingham to work on the fields before we joined the European Union.
Should that happen
worked.
now?
I don't see why not, but I keep saying that the European Union workers, like the Polish who seem to predominate, have established themselves here, and many pay taxes and are part of the community. They won't be affected by this because they can apply to stay and they've got roots and they're good citizens. However, what this will stop is the influx that we're getting, which is turning this country upside down with schools, cannot find places, with health. We cannot afford it anymore. So the argument is that we have to control our borders, and the Australian point system will prevent our health service being abused, will prevent people coming here who will take infrastructure and jobs from people already working in those jobs, and will actually have some form of control. I am absolutely shocked that people cannot see the common sense of that.
So it's not a question of skills, and it doesn't matter high skills, low skills, no skills even, it's if they've got a job to come to.
No, it's not that. I think you need to understand how the point system works. I've actually looked at it. What it is, there is a need, they will make an application, what their skill is or what they're not that have a skill at. And the vacancies or the jobs that are required will be investigated. It's not going to be just a free-for-all. So if there is a shortage, say, of seasonal workers, then maybe we would also have something like the old seasonal worker scheme, which used to work brilliantly. If people wanted to come from anywhere in the world, not just Europe, to do seasonal work in our fields, there was the seasonal worker schemes which farmers had. Now that could be implemented to solve that problem. But the Australian point system, I believe, is essential to prevent our hospitality being abused for benefits, health, schools, and all the other infrastructure. We have got to now put the residents first who are here and protect the interests of those who are here, whether they have arrived from the EU in the past and settled, or whether they've been here for generations. It doesn't matter. We have to control our borders.
So you mentioned the residents there. Obviously the Leave vote in Sleaford and North Highcombe was around 62-63%.
Yes.
A lot's been said about taking back control of our laws from Brussels. Can you name some EU laws directly which you're sort of really unhappy about and would want to take back control of again?
Well, it's not so much the laws, it's all the rules and regulations.
Like which ones?
Well, think about a toothbrush, for example. Apparently around a toothbrush...
Is that really the most important thing?
No, it isn't. I'm just giving an example.
What are some really sort of serious, important ones?
Well, there are a lot of serious, important ones. However, what you've got to do...
Like what?
All right, first of all, control our borders, get out of this freedom of movement.
So that's immigration, which
that's
we've
immigration.
talked about.
Also, to stop paying in ridiculous amounts of money every month to be part of it. We don't need to pay in for being it. The single market, for example, they need us more than we need them. 5.8 million jobs in the European Union are dependent on trade with the UK. This is outside the UK. Already the German industrialists have warned Merkel they don't want any nonsense with tariffs. They want to trade with us freely. If they expect us to pay in, sorry, we don't want to be part of it. If they expect us to have freedom of movement, we don't want to be part of it. Now, other things are quite awful red tape. And crazy...
What sort of red tape?
Red tape. that infects every employer around.
Such as what?
Health and safety has gone to a ridiculous level.
So you'd like to see some of the health and safety laws
Some of those
relaxed a bit
need to
or
be
taken away?
I think it needs common sense. We need to review all the laws that have come in.
There are quite a few, aren't there?
There
So
are
that
a
might
lot.
take a long time.
It could take a long time, but we've got to start somewhere. But the most important thing is to invoke Article 50, or the quickest one, repeal the European Union Communities Act of 1972 and get out. Stop paying in money and get back control. Then we can work through all the legislation and repeal what is inconvenient or adverse to the interests of our nation and keep the ones in place that are beneficial.
Which EU laws would you like to keep?
I think
The thousands of them, there must be.
there's thousands. I mean, we had in place, for example, long before we were in the European Union, we had more legislation to protect workers' rights than any other country in the world. We had legislation, sex discrimination, race discrimination, we had all that in
So
place.
you keep all the workers' rights?
Well, protect the workers' rights, but not to the ridiculous level it's become now, where we've heard of small, medium businesses that might have a rogue employee who uses a tribunal system as a cash cow as opposed to having a real grievance. And this sort of culture has got to stop. And we can do this by putting common sense into the legislature rather than political correctness and political dogma.
So there are a few laws, but maybe a bit more of a common sense approach.
A
That's what
common
you're
sense
saying,
approach, what's good, what's
Okay.
bad, and what will work for us.
Okay,
But
sure.
it's putting this nation and the people
Yeah.
first rather than worrying about a diktat from what is actually a glorified European Union communist
Okay.
MAGA state.
Okay. Right, let's move on from Brexit then, because
Yeah.
I'm sure we can talk
Okay.
about it for
I could
hours.
talk about it all day.
Obviously, there are lots of local issues as well.
Yes, there are.
What's come up on the doorstep?
The main issue is the NHS, with the closure of the accident emergency
At
due to lack
Grantham.
of doctors at Grantham. But it's not just there, it's also a lack of GPs. And people have to queue up or wait for a long time for an appointment. There's a lack of doctors, and there needs to be less red tape. A lot of doctors I've spoken to said the problem is they are tired with having to know how to run surgeries or know how to run their departments, always having to go on conferences and do all this sort of stuff, and red tape and form filling, rather than actually spending the time looking after patients. Now that could be reformed, and also to create more spaces for doctors to train and for nurses. We've got a shortage of nurses because there are not enough training places, and there's some very good quality people out there who want to become nurses, but they're just not the spaces. That's one thing. Another thing is we got an awful settlement for Lincolnshire. As a county councillor, we had crumbs, a massive rural community. The knock-on effect is that rural services are strained, potholes in our roads, some roads becoming undrivable.
Well, the government's announced some money for that just this week.
Yeah, but it's very,
Not
very
enough,
little.
though.
It's not enough. And we look at other areas. We are starved of cash. The reason is they have 7 Tory MPs. They have a Tory police and crime commissioner. The apathy is they will always vote Tory. We don't have to worry about Lincolnshire. Let's just give them enough to survive. That's it. If they were shaken up by having a UKIP MP, not only would that kick them into touch about Brexit, but they, and I will certainly push this, you don't want to lose more seats in Lincolnshire, you're going to have to give us a fair deal. With police and crime, for example, again, we had crumbs. We've been promised a better deal, but it's all gone back to normal. They have a Tory police and crime commissioner, doesn't matter. And visible policing is something people want. It's not happening. And the recruitment
So we need
drive,
more bobbies on the beat, yours.
Absolutely. But
How many more would you say?
Well, we are down on numbers to such a degree that it's becoming ridiculous in some communities. In Sleaford, North Hykeham, you never see a bobby at all.
So how many do you think we sort of need roughly in Lincolnshire?
Ideally, it would be good to have a local bobby on the beat in every village. However, we have to rely
That's
on
quite a lot, though.
There is. And you cannot rely on volunteers. Volunteers, there was a big recruitment drive to get 1,000 volunteers, and only 7 came along. We cannot have policing on the cheap. PCOs, for example, had a great beneficial
Sure.
part
Yeah.
of this, because they're a person in uniform. But what we need is a fair funding deal, which has been promised, which has been kicked into the long grass now, so that we can have more bobbies on the beat.
Okay. Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground there. Just a final question for you. What are your thoughts on the new UKIP leader, Paul Nuttall? Just last month you were quite critical of him to me. You suggested he was a bit of a weak deputy and did little to support Nigel Farage. Do you stand by those comments?
I actually told him to my face his fate.
What did he say then?
He said, "No, I'm a Scouser, and there's no way I'm weak." Anyway, to cut a long story short, I'm very impressed with how he's hit the ground running, and I believe he's going to be a very good leader. And he's already made some choices. He's decided who he's putting in place to be good spokesman, an effective spokesman.
So be a better leader than deputy?
I think he will, because as a deputy, Nigel is an enigma. And I'm a huge admirer of Nigel. He's actually coming to Sleaford North Hykeham, and I've always been a staunch supporter. He is a one-off. You will never have another Nigel. And he's a very, very difficult person to replace. However, Paul is coming through as a strong, determined leader with his different style to Nigel. Let's face it, he drinks Guinness, not warm beer. And he's
so
hit the ground running.
So a bit different then?
It's going to be
short,
different,
yeah.
but I believe now that Paul's come into his own. He's now a leader, and he's also got Nigel Farage's backing. So I am very happy that we now have the leader we need.
Okay, well, sadly, that's all we've got time for.
Okay.
Thanks again for joining us, Victoria. And this afternoon, we'll also have Caroline Johnson from the Conservative Party and Peter Hill from the Monster Raving Loony. Yesterday, we had Ross Pepper from the Liberal Democrats, and tomorrow we've got 5 candidates coming in, 2 independents, a Lincolnshire independent, Labour Party, and someone from the Bus Pass Elvis Party.
Can I also point out, it's a 2-horse race between the Conservatives and UKIP now. And that's why the national media are taking such an interest in this constituency.
The local and national media then.
The local are always interested, and 100% I always support the local press, but the fact the nationals are now getting extremely interested tells me an awful lot.
It should be an interesting last week then.
It will be.